We begin today the Gemara in the last few words in Daf Chav Ches Amud Beis. So this is the sugya that discusses the concept of kavana in mitzvahs. Specifically, we were talking about matzah and then about kiyah shofar, if you have to have kavana or not. So now the Gemara continues with another halacha regarding kavana. Amalei Rab Zera l'shamei, Rab Zera said to his servant, Yichaven, you should have kavana, keep me in mind to be moitzi me that I should be doing the mitzvah utakali, and blow for me. In other words, what he was telling him is, you can't just blow shofar for me when I hear the shofar and I'll be yaitzi. You, the one that blows, has to have him in mind that he's going to be moitzi in the mitzvah. So Alma, what do I see from this? Kasavar, Rab Zera holds, mashmiya boy kavana. The one that's sounding the shofar for someone else has to have kavana to be moitzi the other person listening. Meisvei, so the Gemara asks him this, what did we learn in the Mishnah? A person is walking behind the shul. Or his house was near the shul. And he hears the sound of the shofar, or the reading of the Megillah. So if he had a mind to be yaitze, so he's yaitze. Otherwise he's not yaitze. Or we had before the Pshat in the Gemara that he has to have in mind to actually hear clearly the sound of the shofar and to hear clearly the Megillah. But what do we see in this Mishnah? So the Mishnah says that if you ask kavana is yaitze, but if you had kavana, my hava, how does that help? The other person, in other words, the one that's blowing the shofar or the one that's reading the Megillah, is not having you in mind. He has no idea that you're there. You're walking outside the shul, or you have a house near the shul. He's not having you in mind to be yaitze. So according to Rab Zera, you have to have the other person in mind. So how could it be yaitze?
How do you read it?
If you had kavana, how does that help you? The other person, in other words, the one reading, yes, the one reading does not have you in mind. And for the Gemara, hacha b'shliach tzibur askinan. In the Mishnah, we're talking about a shliach tzibur that's appointed to blow shofar or to read the Megillah for everyone. The daite akula alma. So he is thinking about everybody. He's not thinking about you specifically, but he's there to blow shofar for everybody. So automatically you're included as well. He doesn't have to have you specifically in mind. Toshema, the Gemara brings now another braisa which we had before. Niskaven shemeya. So you have the one that's listening to the sound of the shofar. So he had kavana for the mitzvah. V'loi niskaven mashmiya. However, the one that's sounding the shofar, that's blowing the shofar, he did not have kavana. Or the reverse, niskaven mashmiya. The one sounding the shofar had kavana, but v'loi niskaven shemeya. The one listening did not have kavana. Lo yatsa, you're not going to be yaitze, achi yiskaven shemeya umashmiya. In order to be yaitze, the one blowing the shofar has to have kavana for the mitzvah, and the one listening has to have kavana for the mitzvah. So now, katani, what do we see here? What does it say? Mashmiya dumye de shemeya. The one that's sounding the shofar is similar to the one that's listening to the sound of the shofar. Mashemeya, just like when it comes to the person listening to the sound of the shofar, shemeya la'atzmai. He's listening for himself and he has in mind to be yaitze for himself. Doesn't have to have in mind anything else. He's just listening. Af mashmiya, so too when it comes to the one sounding the shofar for others, mashmiya la'atzmai. It's enough that if he that he blows shofar for himself, and if others are going to hear, they're going to be yaitze. He does not have to have them in mind, because we're comparing the shemeya to the mashmiya. Just like the shemeya has a mind for himself, the mashmiya blows shofar for himself, and automatically the other one is going to be yaitze. Ve katani. And what does it say here in this braisa? According to most versions, the loy has to be taken out. The katani yatsa. And it says here that if the shemeya had a mind and the mashmiya had a mind, you're going to be yaitza. Even if the mashmiya is not having you in mind. If you guide us lo yatsa, then lo yatsa means if the mashmiya did not have in mind. So then lo yatsa. But if he did have in mind, he will be yaitza. But what does he have to have in mind though? Similar to the shemeya that's just thinking to be yaitza for himself, the one sounding the shofar and blowing it for everybody, also has to only think for himself. He doesn't have to have anybody else in mind. That's what it seems from this braisa.
But from Chavkas on base, you also say that?
The lo yatsa? Yeah. No. That doesn't come up over there. Does not come up over there. So the Gemara says, Tanoi, it's a machlekes Tanoim. This halacha that Rab Zera said, that the one sounding the shofar for others has to specifically have in mind to be mitzi the others, this is a machlekes Tanaim. And the Gemara here brings a clear brayso where there's this machlekes. The Tanya we learned in the brayso, shemeya la'atzmai. You're listening to the shofar, you listen for yourself, you have a mind for yourself, you have to have anyone else in mind. And the same thing, umashmiya, the one that's sounding the shofar for others, also mashmiya lefidarka, he blows the shofar like he blows, and according to others, you actually add here into the words in the Gemara, le'atzmai, it's like he just blows for himself, lefidarka, and if others are going to hear, others are going to hear. So the Tanakam is clearly saying that when you're blowing shofar and others are listening, you don't have to have them in mind. They're just going to be yaitze if you blew and they hear. Then Amar Rabbi Yosi comes and says, no, you do have to have the others in mind if you want to be mitzi them. And therefore he says the distinction that we said before. When it comes to shliach tzibur, he's having everybody in mind. That's what he's appointed for. So therefore he doesn't have to have you in mind. But if it's just an individual blowing shofar, so then he's not going to have you in mind automatically. So then lo yatsa achi yiskaven shemeya umashmiya. Then you're not going to be yaitza unless the shemeya is having a mind to be yaitza, and the mashmiya is also having you in mind to be mitzi you. So therefore, Rab Zaida's halacha is following Rab Yosi's opinion, and this is the actual psak din in Shulchan Aruch, that when you come to be mitzi someone else, you have to have him in mind. Unless it's a shliach tzibur. So for example, if you're coming Shabbos day and there's a kiddush and there's someone that makes kiddush every week for everybody, you don't have to specifically tell him, have me in mind with your kiddush, because he makes kiddush for everybody. But if there's one individual that's making kiddush for himself and you want to be yaitze with his kiddush, you have to tell him, have me in mind. It's exactly what Rabbi Yosi is saying over here. This is the psak din, not only regarding kiddush, regarding any mitzvah. This sugya here,
what do we say between these two things?
it's not the same. I'll explain you afterwards. It's not the same. This sugya here is also the source of the big machlekes rishonim and paiskim. What's the psak din lahalacha regarding the big question of whether mitzvahs tzrichas kavana or not? Do we paskin that mitzvahs require kavana, or do we paskin mitzvahs do not require kavana? So we had a discussion in the previous sugya about that. Rave, Rabbe, Abaye were discussing it, and over here we have Rab Zayda. So some rishonim say that these two things go together. The concept of having kavanah for the mitzvah and the concept of you blowing for someone else and having the other person in mind goes together. If you look in the top Rashi on the Amud here, so when Rashi explains Rab Zayda, that Rab Zayda said to his servant, have me in mind, what does it mean? Have me in mind for what? Lo hitziyeni yedei chayvasi. Have me in mind that I should be yaitze, the obligation of the mitzvah. So according to this Rashi, it must be that Rab Zayda held mitzvah tzrichas kavanah. If mitzvahs don't need kavana, so then he doesn't have to have you in mind for the chiyuv of the mitzvah. He doesn't even have to have himself in mind for the chiyuv of the mitzvah. So it must be that Rab Zayda, if we're paskening like Rab Zayda, we also pasken that mitzvah tzrichas kavana. That's one shit in the Rishonim.
What to do with the blower?
With the
blower.
What do you mean? What's the
one who's Rab Zayda himself has to have in mind.
Correct, both. The Rab Zayda has to have in mind for himself to be yaitze the mitzvah, and then an additional requirement that the one blowing for you also has to have you in mind. But for what though? To have you in mind to be yaitze the mitzvah. So that's all based on the concept of mitzvah tzrichas kavana. Other Rishonim, however, say that what Rab Zayda is saying here is even if you hold mitzvahs ain't tzrichas kavana. You don't have to have kavana l'shem mitzvah. However, the one blowing for you has to have you in mind that he's blowing for you. Not l'shem mitzvah. I'm not blowing just for myself, I'm blowing for you as well. Not necessarily l'shem mitzvah. Even if you hold mitzvahs ain't tzrichas kavana, when you're being mitzi someone else, you have to just know that you're blowing for them. But not necessarily l'shem mitzvah. That's what many Rishonim hold. And therefore we paskin mitzvahs ain't tzrichas kavana.
Mitzi someone else for what?
I'm blowing for myself and for you.
Why?
Not l'shem mitzvah necessarily. The l'shem what is not something you have to have in mind. Obviously, he's doing it for the purpose of the mitzvah, but that's not something you have to have in mind. You don't need that kavana. I'm blowing it for me and also for you.
But why can't
That's
you
it.
divide up and say that the person who's listening has to have kavanah for the mitzvah?
Correct, but the point is, though, that from this requirement of Rab Zayda, you can't prove that, though. Possibly, but from what Rab Zayda said, you can't prove that mitzvah tzrichas kavana. The Rambam's opinion is, a famous shitta of the Rambam, going back to the Gemara before, the Rambam says that when it comes to all mitzvahs, ain't tzrichas kavana, like for example, shofar, lulav, and so on, you don't need kavana. Again, let me do that again. According to the Rambam, all mitzvahs do need kavana. The only mitzvah that does not need kavana is the mitzvah of matzah, because you have hana. When you have hana, that for that kind of a mitzvah you don't need kavana. But for all other mitzvahs where there's no hana, over there you do need kavana. That's the Rambam Shitta. Zakta Mishnah. So this Mishnah begins here with a subject related to, as the Mefarshim explained, related to the concept of kavana. That was the end of the previous Mishnah. So the Mishnah continues bringing something about kavana. Moshe Rabbeinu lifts up his hand, v'gava Yisrael v'goymer, and then the Yidden will be strong in the war of Amalek. Is it the hand of Moshe that causes them to be victorious or to be defeated in the war? What this is saying to you is, when Yidden look upward, and they subjugate their hearts to the Father in heaven, then they were strong. But otherwise, they would fall. A similar thing we could say, you should make for yourself a snake and put it on this tall pole. Whoever gets bitten by a snake and will look there, he will live. This snake that they would look at, this would make them live or die. Hello, what it means is, when you look up to heaven and they subjugate their hearts to their Father in heaven, they would be healed. And otherwise, they would die. Now the Mishnah says another halacha regarding shofar, cheresh, sheite v'katan. A person that's a cheresh, so usually in Mishnayos, whenever it mentions cheresh, it means someone that's deaf and mute. And a sheite and a katan, a shaitan and someone that's under bar mitzvah, they can't be mitzi someone else the obligation of the mitzvah of shofar. Here's the rule. If you yourself are not obligated in this mitzvah, you can't be mitzi anyone else this mitzvah if you're not obligated. So as I mentioned, cheresh is usually a deaf mute. But here, regarding this Mishnah, because it's speaking about shofar, there are some Rishonim that say that no, it's talking about someone that's deaf and not necessarily mute, only deaf. Why? Because the mitzvah of shofar is to hear the sound of the shofar. So if he's just deaf, so he can't hear, so he's not chayiv in the mitzvah of shofar either. So if we hear cheresh means just deaf, even not mute. That's what many Rishonim say. However, the Tzemach Tzedek here says that no, if it says cheresh sheite v'katan in this Mishnah, just like in every other place, it means dafka deaf mute. And a person that's only deaf and not mute, so he can blow the shofar, but he can't hear the sound of the shofar, he's obligated in the mitzvah of shofar. And this Mishnah, this word cheresh in this Mishnah, the two ways how to interpret the word cheresh in the Mishnah is the source of the big machlokes regarding the mitzvah of shofar. What's the main mitzvah? Is the mitzvah hearing the sound of the shofar? Or is the mitzvah the blowing of the shofar? If the mitzvah is hearing the sound of the shofar, so then a cheresh, which is just deaf, is not obligated in the mitzvah. But if the mitzvah is blowing the shofar, then if he's just deaf, so then he's still considered to be a bardas. He's chayiv in the mitzvah. He's just chayiv to blow the shofar. Only a deaf mute will be parted from the mitzvah. So this is one of the sources for that machlokes.
It's just blowing of it.
Correct.
But if you don't hear it,
there's no mitzvah to hear, just to blow. Skatem, through to blow. It's interesting, the Alter Rebbe, the most Rishonim say that the mitzvah is to hear. That's the lashon of the bracha that we say, l'shmaya kol shofar. But the Tzemach Tzedek on this Mishnah has a big arichas, and he argues, no, the mitzvah is dafka to blow the shofar, and not the hearing of the shofar. Sagt the Gemara Tanur Rabbanan, we learned in Abraisa, kol chayav mitkir shofar. Everybody's obligated in the blowing of the shofar. Koyanim, Leviim, Yisraelim, Geirim, Va'avodim, Meshuchranim, the slaves that were freed and they become Yidden. The tumtum va'adregenis. So a tumtum is someone that has no simonim to see if they're a zachar or a nekeva, a male or a female. And andregenis is someone that has both simonim, the simon of a zachar and of a nekeva. A person that's half eved and half freed. So let's say he was owned by partners and one of them freed him and one of them did not. So he's half still an eved and half free. So he also is obligated in the mitzvah. Now the Braisa explains, Tumtum, which has no simonim, we don't know if he's a male or female. He can't be mitzi anybody, not someone that's like him, and not someone that's not like him. Why? Because we don't know what he is. It could be, it'll turn out that the truth is that he's a female. So if he's a nekeva, he's not obligated in the mitzvah, or she's not obligated in the mitzvah, so she can't be mitzi anyone else. So Tumtum, we don't know what he is, so he can't be mitzi anybody. androgynous. And androgynous is someone that has the siman of a zachar and of an nekeva. So therefore, maitzi es minoi, so then he could be maitzi someone else that's just like him, avaloi shayne minoi. But someone that's not like him, he can't be maitzi. Misha chetzi eved v'chetzi ben chayrin, someone that's half eved and half freed. And in maitzi, so he can't be maitzi loyas minoi, not someone that's like him, v'loy shayne minoi, not someone that's a full yid, not like him. Why? Because when he blows shofar, half of the tkiyah is coming from an eved. This is a tkiyah that comes from a person that's half eved and half ben chayrin. So therefore, he can't be maitzi anybody. So the Gemara Mamar, the master said here in this brayse, everybody's obligated to blow shofar. Kayanim, Leviim, V'Yisraelim. Says the Gemara Pshita. Isn't this obvious? In Hani loy mechayvi, if these are not chayiv, so man mechayvi, who is going to be chayiv? I mean, this is a mitzvah like any other mitzvah. So of course the Kayanim, Leviim, and Yisraelim are obligated to blow shofar. So the Gemara says that the chiddush over here is Kayanim itztrichilei. The chiddush is that Kayanim are chayiv to blow shofar. Why would I think they're not? So I would think to say, oh, the pasuk says, Yoim Trua Yiyelachem. Rosh Hashanah is one special day that you blow shofar. So therefore I say as follows. Man, someone that blowing shofar is just for that one day. Hudu mechayvi. He's chayiv in the mitzvah. But v'hani kainim, these kainim that are in the Beis HaMikdash. But hoyel v'isnu b'tkiyas t'chol hashana. So since in the Beis HaMikdash they blow all year, they blow with the trumpets for the karbanis. So eime loy l'chayvi. I would think maybe they shouldn't be chayiv because they have trumpets that they're hearing all year. It's not just one special day. Kamash malon, that's the chiddush that kainim are chayiv to hear the shofar as well. But the Gemara doesn't accept this pshat. Frek the Gemara, mi domi. How can you compare this that they hear the chatzaitzres every day to the shofar? Hasam chatzaitzres v'hacha shofar. Over there, they're hearing the sound of the chatzaitzres every day, and now we're saying there's one special day for shofar. So it's not. There's no comparison between the two. Elo the Gemara says a different pshat. Itztrech. I have to tell you that kainim are obligated because I would think to say as follows. Hoyel nonsense. It says in the Mishnah. Shava hayovel l'Rosh Hashanah. Yovel is the same as Rosh Hashanah l'tkiyah or l'brachas, that you blow shofar and the brachas that you say. The malchi is achrenis and shofris. So therefore, there's a gzeira shava. I compare the two. So maybe I should say as follows: Man the iseh b'mitzvah hayovel, iseh b'mitzvah the Rosh Hashanah. One that the mitzvah of yovel applies to him, the mitzvah of blowing Rosh Hashanah, the shofar also applies to him. But v'hani kainim, these kainim, hoyel v'lesnu b'mitzvah the yovel. Since in some aspects of the mitzvah of yovel, it does not apply to them. Where do I see this? Tatnan, we learned in the Mishnah, kainim or leviim. The kainim and the leviim, meichrin l'olam, they could always sell any property that they want, and v'gayelin l'olam, and they could also redeem it whenever they want. So Rashi explains what's going on over here. Meichin lo'olam, Rashi says, is not really a chiddush. I mean, obviously you can kainim whenever you want. That's not only Kainim Leviim. Anybody could sell whenever they want. Rashi says this is just brought derech agav. The main thing is the next part. Goyel lo'olam. In Eretz Yisrael, when you sell a property, so then there's two halachas. If it's a property within a city that has a wall around it, so over there you just have 1 year to redeem it. If it's a property in a city that's open, that has no wall around it, so then you have... Then only after the halach over there is that you have 2 years. 2 years to come and redeem it. Right? Over there you have to actually wait. You have to wait 2 years, and after 2 years you can come and redeem it. So there are limitations. When it comes b'chlal, for every year there are limitations when you can come and redeem it. But for the Kainim, you don't have any of these limitations. The Kainim can come and redeem it whenever they want. That's the pshat in when it says here, Goyel l'olam. Now, how is this related to Yovel? This is related to Yovel because all these halachas only apply in the time when there's Yovel. When there's no Yovel, these halachas don't apply. That's the pshat according to the girsa that we have here in our Gemara. But Rashi, there's a long Rashi here, Rashi and Tosfos both say, the fact that they can redeem whenever they want does not make the point that that the mitzvah of Yovel does not apply to them. How do you see that the mitzvah of Yovel doesn't apply to them? So therefore, if you look in the Rashi, he has another girsha. Kainim leviim makdishin la'olam v'goyelin la'olam. We're not talking about selling and redeeming what you sold, but we're rather talking about kainim could be makdish. They could make something hektish, any property they own, and then they could redeem it whenever they want. And this shows how Yovel does not apply to them. Why? Because by a Yid, when he sells something, not sells, again, when he's makdish something to hektish, what happens is, if hektish then went and sold it, and then you did not redeem it before Yovel, when Yovel comes, it does not go back to the original owner. Who gets it when Yovel comes? It goes to the Kainim. The original owner never gets it back. Whereas when it comes to Kainim, even if they're makdish something and they didn't redeem it before Yovel, it doesn't matter. A Kayin always has the right to redeem anything that it was makdish to hektish forever. Yovel is not affected. So here is a halacha where you see that that Yovel does not apply to a Kayin. So if Yovel doesn't apply to a Kayin, I would think to say that the mitzvah of Shofar doesn't apply to them as well. As the Gemara continues, so mitzvah de Rosh Hashanah, maybe the mitzvah of Rosh Hashanah, which is compared to Yovel, they should not be obligated as well. Kamash Malone, that's the chiddush here in this brayse that the Kayinim and the Leviim are chayiv in the mitzvah of Shofar. Then it said in the brayse, Misha chetzi eved v'chetzi ben chayden, ein nemoitzi leis mine v'lo yishein minoi. If you're half eved and half free, you can't be moitzi. It's Kainim and the Leviim. It goes together. Chayre. Yisraelim Taka didn't have to say. The main chiddush was the Kainim. So again, a half eved and a half ben chayrin can't be moitzi, not his min, someone like him, and not someone not like him, because he's half eved. So how could he blow the shofar for anybody? So Rav Huna says, but moitzi, for himself he could blow shofar. So Amalei Rav Nachman asks Rav Huna, how could he blow even for himself? What's the difference? For others he can't blow, why not? Because the half of Eved that he is can't be moitzi another person that's free. Even another person that's like him, but you can't be moitzi the other person, that part of him that's free that has to be yotze, and he, which is half Eved, is being moitzi him. So if so, la'atzmei nami, the same thing applies if he's blowing for himself. Lo osi tzad avdos didei umapik tzad chaydos didei. His half of being an eved, which is blowing the shofar, cannot even be moitzi himself, the part of him that's freed. So how could he even blow for himself? Elam Rav Nachman. So Rav Nachman says, af la'atzmei eine moitzi. A person that's half eved and half a ben chayrin can't blow shofar even for himself. Tanya nami hachi. This is what it says in the brayse. Misha chetzi eved v'chetzi ben chayrin. He can't be mitzi even himself because he's half an eved. In connection to this, the Gemara brings more general halachas regarding being mitzi another yid with a mitzvah. So Tani Ahava Berei de Rab Zera. Ahava, the son of Rab Zera, learned a brayse that kol brachas kulan. When it comes to all brachas, afa pisha yatsa, even if you were yaitze the bracha mitzi, you could be mitzi others. So what we're talking about over here is a bracha for a mitzvah. A bracha of a mitzvah, so even though you were yaitz already, you could be mitzi others. Why? Didn't we say in the Mishnah the klal is that if you yourself are chayiv, then you could be mitzi someone else. But if you're not chayiv, you can't. So you already made the bracha. How you can be mitzi someone else? So Rashi says this is the concept of kol Yisrael arevin zeh b'zeh. Even if you were yaitz for yourself, but because you have the mitzvah of arvos, if another yid did not do the mitzvah yet, it's also your obligation to be mitzi him or to make sure that he does the mitzvah. So therefore, you can be mitzi him. But when it comes to making a bracha on food, like bread or wine, and Rashi says this is just an example, it refers to any birchas hanenen, any brachas that you make on food. So over here, the other person doesn't have an obligation to eat, that now it becomes my obligation to see to it that he does it. He wants to eat. He doesn't have to eat. If he wants to eat, he's not allowed to eat without a bracha. She'im lo yatsa maitzi. So then if you yourself did not make a bracha yet, and you're going to be eating the food, so then you can make the bracha and have the other person in mind. But vim yatsa ina maitzi. But if you made the bracha for yourself already, you can't make the bracha for the other person because the other person has no obligation to make this bracha. The concept of arvos is only if the other person has an obligation. So now the Gemara has a question. Boy Rava asked a question. How about birchas halechem shel matzah, the bracha of hamaitzi, which is a birchas hanenin, but you're making this bracha when you're eating the mitzvah of matzah, or birchas hayayin shel kiddush hayayim, or the bracha of bayre priyagafen that you're making when you're making kiddush Friday night. Samahu, what's with this? Could you be maitzi with this bracha someone else if you already made kiddush? Do I say, kivin d'chayvohu mapik? Since, true, it's a birchas hanenin, but why am I making this birchas hanenin right now? Because I have to make kiddush on the wine. And therefore, this birchas hanenin becomes a bracha which is an obligation for the mitzvah of the kiddush. Or the same thing, the hamaitzi for the matzah. I'm eating the matzah because of the mitzvah. So therefore, even the bracha of hamaitzi is for the mitzvah of matzah. So I could be maitzi another person. Or perhaps bracha lav chayvihi. No, this bracha is not an obligation. This bracha is just a plain birchas hanenin. The bracha of alachilas matzah, or maybe the other bracha of kiddush that you say that you could be maitzi the other person. But the bracha of birchas hanenin, that's just a bracha on the food, and that you can't be maitzi someone else if you already made kiddush or if you already ate the matzah. So the Gemara says, Tashema. Yeah, to make a kiddush again after you made kiddush the first time. So the Gemara brings the Raya, the Omar Ravashi. Ravashi said, Ki avinon bei Rav Papi. When I was by Rav Papi, having mekadesh lon, he made kiddush for us. And then and then his worker came from the field Friday night. They arrived late from the field. Having mekadesh lo, he made kiddush for them again. And the Gemara knows that what this means is he made kiddush and he even made the bracha of Beiri Priya Gofen, and he was maitzi then with the bracha of Beiri Priya Gofen as well. So you see that you make kiddush once, you make kiddush again, and even the bracha of Beiri Priya Gofen, you can be maitzi someone else. What? No, it's talking about by night. That's what it's talking about. I mean, you're talking about a worker coming from the field. It's Friday. Tana Rabbanah, we learned in the Braise, lo yifreis adam pruse lo oirchen. You should not cut the bread, but it doesn't just mean to cut the bread. It means you're making the bracha of hamaitzi when you cut the bread for the guests. You want to be maitzi then with the bracha. Unless you're also eating and you have to make the bracha, and then you could be maitzi them. As we said before, if you have to make the bracha, you could be maitzi. But if you don't have to make the bracha, so birchas hanenin, you can't be maitzi someone else. But even if you already made the bracha for yourself, you can cut the bread and make the bracha again for your children. And what this is talking about, children that are small, and you want to teach them how to make the bracha, kedei lechancham b'mitzvahs. For the purpose of chinuch, you're allowed to make a bracha to help your child and teach him how to make the bracha, and it's not a bracha levatala. Or b'halel, or b'megillah, if you're saying halal and megillah, which are both a mitzvah midrabanan, afa pisha yotza, even if you are already yaitze the mitzvah of halal, you were yaitze megillah because this is a mitzvah, afa pisha yotza maitzi. Even though you were yaitze already, you can say it again to be maitzi someone else. Again, like we said in the beginning, the concept of arvos, that if another yid didn't do the mitzvah yet, it's your obligation to see to it that he does the mitzvah, so you can say the halal and the megillah for him and make the brachas for him. Hadran aloch ra'uhu bezdin. This is the conclusion of the third Perek of Masechta Rosh Hashanah.
By Friday night you can make kiddush again or something?
Yeah. Yes.
No,
by night as well. Steht da. Sagt der Heilige Mishneh, Yontev shel Rosh Hashanah shechaliyah is b'Shabbos. A Yontev of Rosh Hashanah that falls out in Shabbos. B'hamikdash taken in the Beis Hamikdash, they would blow the shofar. Avaloi b'Medina, but not in the country, anywhere outside the Beis Hamikdash. And Rashi here says this includes even the city of Yerushalayim. Mishachara Beis Hamikdash, when the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed, Hiskan Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai instituted she had taken b'chol makom sheyesh bei bezdin, that they should blow in any place where there is a bezdin. And the Rishonim say, as we'll see in the Gemara, the whole concern is that he might come to carry the shofar, but in a place that there's a bezdin, we're not concerned. Amar Rabbi Lazar says, not in every place. Like Hiskan Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, ela b'Yavne b'lvad. Rabbi Yochanan only instituted this in the place of Yavne, where you had the Sanhedrin Gedolah there. The whole Sanhedrin of 71 was there in Yavne. So a place like in Yavne, or in any other place where the whole Sanhedrin is, then by a Bezdin of 71, there you could blow the shofar, but not by any other Bezdin. Amru Loi, so they said to Rabbi Lazar, Echad Yavne, this is both whether it's in Yavne, V'echad Kol Makom, or in any other place, Sheyesh by Bezdin, where there is a Bezdin, even if it's not a Bezdin like the Sanhedrin, any Bezdin, you can blow the shofar there. That was part of Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai's takana. V'oid Zeis, another point here, Hoysa Yerushalayim Yisera al Yavne. There was an advantage regarding the city of Yerushalayim more than Yavne. The Gemara is going to explain why it says V'oid. We weren't comparing Yavne to Yerushalayim Tiller, so why does it say V'oid? But the Mishnah is going to make a point of how Yerushalayim has an advantage over Yavne. Shekol Ir Shehiroyeh. Any city that you can see Yerushalayim, V'Shemas, and you can hear the sound of the shofar from Yerushalayim, Ukraiva, and it's close enough to Yerushalayim, V'Yechayla Lava, and you can come there on Yontif, Toikin. You can blow in that city as well. So not only in Yerushalayim, but also if it's close enough, with all these things that we just mentioned, you can blow there as well. But in Yavne, they would only blow in the Bezdin, but not in any other cities that are near Yavne like it was in Yerushalayim. So some Mefarshim say, some Rishayim say, the Rambam says, that in the end of the Mishnah, we're talking about the whole city of Yerushalayim. Right? So therefore, the Rambam says that in the beginning of the Mishnah, when it says that they would blow in the Beis HaMikdash, that Mikdash means also the whole Yerushalayim, not just the Beis HaMikdash, like you see in the end of the Mishnah, that it's speaking about the whole Yerushalayim. But Rashi doesn't learn this way. Tosfos here says, maybe Rashi would agree to this, that it says in the beginning of the Mishnah that they would blow only in the Beis HaMikdash, that's when the Beis HaMikdash is standing. Then they would blow only in the Beis HaMikdash. But after the Chorban Beis HaMikdash, they would blow in the whole city of Yerushalayim. And after the Chorban, that's the next part of the Mishnah in the end, when it says that not only in Yerushalayim, but all the outlying cities that are near, close enough to Yerushalayim.
Only mit der Bezen.
Huh?
Only mit der Bezen.
In Yerushalayim, lav dafka actually.
No,
we'll see in the Gemara.
Chutz Yerushalayim.
Outside Yerushalayim, if it's near Yerushalayim and it could see and hear Yerushalayim, I don't even know if it needs a bezin either. No. We'll see in the Hemshech of the Gemara. We'll see. From where do I know that on Shabbos you can't blow shofar outside of the Beis HaMikdash? Because there's one pasuk that says Shabbos and Zichron Trua, that it's a yantiv and it's Zichron Trua, it's a remembrance of the Trua. Another pasuk it says Yom Trua, it's a day that you actually blow shofar. So do you actually blow shofar, or is it just remembering the inyan of shofar? Like Kashya, so these two psukim is not a question. Kan be yomtiv shechaliyah is b'Shabbos. If yomtiv is on Shabbos, then you don't blow the shofar. Kan be yomtiv shechaliyah is b'chayil. And a yomtiv that's on a weekday, then you blow the shofar. So the Gemara asks on this, if you're saying that you're not allowed to blow shofar on Shabbos, we learn from the pasuk because it says Zichron Trua. If so, b'mikdash heichi takinan. Why should there be a difference between inside the Beis HaMikdash or outside the Beis HaMikdash? How would they blow shofar inside the Beis HaMikdash? Another question. Halav malachihi, blowing shofar is not a malacha. That you need a pasuk to come and say, to minimize and say that you don't blow the shofar. Rashi is actually not goydes the word lav malacha. Rashi is goydes v'oid ha malachi. You read it as a wonder. Is this a malacha? In other words, the pshat in the Gemara over here is, you're telling me that there's one pasuk telling me that you do have to blow. Then another pasuk coming and saying, no, you don't blow. So if it would be a malacha, then I would say that the pasuk Yom Trua is coming to let you know that although it's a malacha, so you may have thought that you can't do this in Yom Tiv, nevertheless, no, Yom Trua, you do have to blow. And then the other pasuk, Zichron Trua, would come and say, no, not always. You can't blow on Shabbos. You can only blow on Yom Tiv. Right? But since it's not a malacha b'chlal, so this whole pshat that you're saying for these two psukim doesn't apply b'chlal. It's not a malacha. And the Gemara brings, where do I see that it's not a malacha to blow shofar? Because the Tanya, or the Tana, the Beis Shmuel, call melechas aveda loisasu. Torah says you're not allowed to do any malacha. So yotzasat ki shofar erdiyas apas. This does not include blowing shofar. Blowing shofar is not a malacha. And also the diyas apas. The diyas apas is in the olden days, the ovens, when they would put bread into the oven, they would attach it to the walls. And that's how it would bake, and it would get a crust on the wall, and then they would have to remove it from the wall. They had a special utensil to remove it from the wall, so of the oven. So both blowing shofar is not asam and atayre, and taking out the bread is a skill, but it's not a malacha. Right? And tkiyah shofar, why is tkiyah shofar is asam? It's asam d'Rabbanan. Why is tkiyah shofar asam d'Rabbanan? Because it's a uvdin d'chayil. Now usually it's with asam b'chlal on every Shabbos. And any Shabbos b'chlal, you're not allowed to blow shofar. Why? Because it's a uvdin d'chayil. It's a mundane weekday activity. Okay, but it's not a ism in atayra though. So you can't say that these two psukim are coming to address blowing of the shofar. Elo Marave, so Rave says, Midoiraise Mishre Shari. Min atayra you're allowed to blow shofar on Shabbos. V'Rabbanon hu de gazebei k'derabba. And the Rabbanon, the ones that made a gezerah, like Rabbi said, Domarabba kochayav mit kiyah shofar. Everybody's obligated to blow shofar. Ve'ena k'kim mit kiyah shofar. Not everybody knows how to blow. So therefore, you might take the shofar to someone that's proficient, he should teach you, and you might carry it 4 amas in the Rosh Hashanah. And behind the time of the Lulev, and behind the time of the Megillah. This is the reason by Lulev and also by Megillah. Why? Because we're afraid that he might carry it in the Rosh Hashanah. But Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch says that shiur is not exactly the same by Lulav and Megillah, because really by shiur, as I mentioned before, the reason why you're not allowed to blow shiur is, Alter Rebbe says, is because it's a mundane activity. Uvdin d'chayil. That's the real Isser. Elamai, the question is, the mitzvah should push off the Isser midrabanan of it being a uvdin d'chayil. Why does the mitzvah not push off the fact that it's a uvdin d'chayil? Because we're afraid Shem Yavirenu Dal Damas B'Rosh Hashanah. So ultimately, by shiur, according to the Alter Rebbe, the reason is you don't blow shiur on Rosh Hashanah because it's a mundane activity, because of uvdin d'chayil.
What do you do with two psukim?
These two psukim, the Gemara doesn't explain it here. I don't know. The Yerushalmi, by the way, brings these two psukim, and that's the maskana in the Yerushalmi. But here the Bavli asks questions on this. So the Gemara here brings this takana that Rabbi Yechanan ben Zakkai made, that in a bezdin you should blow the shofar, or in Yavne. So it brings the story of what happened. So Tana Rabbana, we learned in the Brais, Pa'amachas chol Rosh Hashanah liyes b'Shabbos. So one time Rosh Hashanah fell out on Shabbos. And as some Mefarshim say, this was the first time this happened after the Churban Beis HaMikdash. And where were the Yidden then? Where was the Bezdin, the Sanhedrin? They were in Yavne. V'hayu kol ha'arim miskansin, and all the people from all the cities gathered to Yavne over there to hear, to see if they're going to blow shofar or not. Amalei Rabbi Yechanan ben Zakkai lebnei b'seirah. Rabbi Yechanan ben Zakkai said to the b'nei b'seirah, Rashi says they were the Gedolei Adar, they were the great people in the generation. So they said, so Rabbi Yechanan ben Zakkai says to the b'nei b'seirah, nitka, let's blow shofar. Right? Just like when the Beis HaMikdash they blew shofar, so over here we have the Bezdin, the Sanhedrin here in Yavne, let's blow shofar. Amrulai, so the Bnei Seirah said to Rabbi Yechanan ben Zakkai, Nidin, let's discuss this. Let's see if this is the right thing that we should do or not. Amalahem, Rabbi Yechanan ben Zakkai says to them, Nitka v'achakach nidin. Let's first blow the shofar and then we'll discuss it. Then what happened? Once they already blew the shofar, so now Amrullah, the Bnei B'Seirah, etc. Rabbi Yechanan ben Zakkai nidin. No, so let's discuss this, whether this is the right thing that we should institute over here, that in the Bezdin of Yavne we should blow shofar. Amalehem, not Rabbi Yechanan ben Zakkai said to them, Kvar nishma kerem beYavne. The horn has been blown and the shofar has been blown in Yavne already. And ve'im meshivin la'acham ma'aseh. And after the fact, once everybody heard this and everybody saw what was done, if we're going to start discussing now and take it back, it's going to become an embarrassment for the Bezdin and people will say that we made a mistake, so let's leave it as is. So that's how Rabbi Yechanan ben Zakkai pushed through his takana that he wanted to institute, that you should be able to blow in the Bezdin. Okay, the next thing it said in the Mishnah was that the Tanna Kama said, anywhere there's a Bezdin, you can blow. Rabbi Lazar said, only in Yavne, right? Omar Rabbi Lazar, lehiskan Rabbi Yechanan ben Zakkai, ela b'Yavne b'lvad. It was only in Yavne. And then the Mishnah continued, Amrulai, they said to Rabbi Lazar, echad Yavne v'echad kol makom sheyesh bei Bezdin. That this is not only in Yavne, but this is in any place. So the Gemara asks, Amrulai, hainu Tanna Kama. The opinion that's brought in the beginning is also saying every Bezdin, anywhere. And then the Omrullah that's responding to Rabbi Lazar seems to be saying the exact same thing, that they told Rabbi Lazar anywhere, not only in Yavne. So why is the Mishnah repeating this again? So the Gemara answers there's a difference. Ike beinayu, the difference is beidine de akroi. If you have a bezdin that is not a set bezdin that's established in a place, it's a bezdin that is temporary. So according to the Tanna Kama, any bezdin, anywhere, even if it's temporary, but Rashi holds actually that it has to be a bezdin of at least 23 though. You don't need a bezdin of 71 like Yavne, but you need a bezdin of 23, but they don't have to be permanent in their place. That's what the Tanna Kama is saying. Whereas according to the Omrulai, the next opinion that's brought in the Mishnah that argues with Rabbi Lazar, they argue with Rabbi Lazar that said that the Kana of Rabbi Yechanan ben Zakkai was only by a bezdin of 71. However, by a bezdin of 23, it has to be a bezdin that's established, that has a set place, not just a bezdin that's in a temporary place. That's the difference here.